Now, in the A-level exam, the examiner is going to be giving you marks for showing different sorts of skill. And these different kinds of marks are called AO1 marks, AO2 marks, and AO3 marks. Now, AO1 marks are given for factual information, so description. If a question, for example, asks you to describe or outline a particular theory, that is exactly what you do. You just give factual information about it. You do not evaluate it. And the examiner will give you AO1 marks for showing that skill. The second kind of marks that the examiner can give you are AO2. Now, AO2 marks are given for what the examiner calls contextualization. Now, that sounds an awfully complicated word, but what it actually boils down to is the examiner wants you to take the information in a particular situation, for example, that they might have described, and apply your knowledge to that situation. Now, to get those AO2 marks, it's not enough simply to repeat the name of the character in that situation, for example. The examiner will not regard that as contextualization. To show the examiner that you are really engaging with the stimulus or the situation that they have presented you with, it is a really good idea to actually take bits of that description and put them in quotation marks so that you can make a point and then illustrate what you mean by giving the examiner part of the situation that he's just described to you, so that he can see this is your knowledge and this is how you have applied it to the scenario that he's presented you with. So that is what we mean by AO2 marks. Now, AO3 marks are for evaluation, and that means actually showing the examiner that you can form some sort of a judgment about a particular approach or theory. This is not just factual information. This is very different to just AO1 marks. AO3 marks are gained for being able to talk about the strengths or weaknesses of a particular approach or theory, for example, or being able to quote research studies that might back up a particular point that you've made. When you're writing these different sorts of sentences, you need to show the examiner very clearly, this is me doing AO1, or this is me doing AO2, or this is me doing AO3. And one of the most heartbreaking times that I've had is when I've seen students work, when the student clearly has a lot of knowledge about the subject, but they actually haven't done what the question has asked them to do. They've simply written everything that they know about a particular subject. So the very first thing that you need to do is pay very close attention to the command terms that the examiner uses. If you go on the AQA website, you will see a list of all the command terms that the examiner can use. You must do what the command term is asking you to do in the question. So, for example, a very common command term is outline a particular study or theory or approach. And that means simply describe it to him. That will get you AO1 marks. If it says evaluate, again, he isn't asking you to describe, he's asking you to talk about the strengths and weaknesses. So if you do describe, you're just wasting your time. You're not getting any marks because you're not obeying the command term. Now, there are a couple of command terms that people sometimes misunderstand, and it is vitally important that you actually do what these command terms tell you to do. The first of these is discuss. Now, discuss basically means that you outline and evaluate. So if you see the command term discuss, that means that there are AO1 marks available and AO3 marks available. So you will have to show both skills. The other command term that students very often have problems with is compare and contrast. Again, when I've examined, I have been heartbroken when I've seen a student's work when they obviously have a lot of knowledge, but they have simply just described one theory and then described a second theory. They haven't compared and contrasted them. So what that command term is asking you to do is basically point out the similarities and the differences between two theories or two approaches. So if you simply describe one theory and then follow it up by a description of another theory, you will get 0 marks. You have to obey the command term that the examiner sets. That is what he's awarding the marks for. Now, most students are able to get AO1 marks without too much problem. Most people can describe studies and theories and approaches. What actually decides the grade that you will get in the end is how good you are at AO3. So evaluation is the hardest skill. Now remember what I said earlier, you need to show the examiner, this is me doing AO3. So imagine you're the examiner, imagine you have 300 exam scripts to mark. You want the students who've written those answers to make your life as easy as possible because you have so many scripts to mark. So the student who actually highlights to the examiner, this is me doing AO3, they are going to make the examiner's life an awful lot more easy for him, aren't they? So you need to highlight by opening your evaluation sentences with some really strong openings so the examiner can see straight away, oh yes, here's a paragraph of AO3. So start your evaluation sentences with statements such as, one strength of this theory is that, or a real weakness with this approach is that, so that the examiner can clearly see right from the beginning of your sentence, this is evaluation. What annoys examiners is when they cannot tell, is this student doing AO1 or AO3? So you need to make it very clear. And a little tip that I give my students is don't start evaluation sentences with the names of researchers, because that leads you to describe the research, which is AO1, not AO3. So my best advice is to work on your openings of your evaluation sentences, and that way the examiner will know, yes, this person is doing evaluation, I can give them these marks. Okay. Now, a good way to structure your paragraphs when you're writing paragraphs of evaluation is to make an opening statement with a strong opening phrase, such as a strength of this or a weakness of this. Then give it some substance by using an example in the middle, and then your final sentence should tie it back to what your original point was. So if you want to think of it as a sandwich, or some of my students have thought of it as a kind of burger, so you have an opening, you have a filling, and then you have something to close it down at the end. And if you follow that structure, it will enable you to develop your points fully, and the examiner can see, yes, that is a really well-made point, I can give it some credit. So just to reiterate, AO1 marks are for factual description, AO2 is for contextualization, so applying your knowledge to a situation, and most importantly, although it's those AO3 marks. The evaluation marks are what decide grades at the end of the day. So work on those, and that will help you to maximize your marks.